Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed. At 1,000 subscribers, I'll be posting a special video. I yanked the router plug and her video froze mid-eye roll. I'm Nate, 29, and I was done being her wallet. Riley's door flew open and headphone cords whipped like warning flags. "You parasite," she hissed while texts pinged from her crew. I slipped the plug into my pocket and waited for the counterpunch. She stalked down the hall and planted herself inches away. "Reconnect now, I have a deadline," she said through tight teeth. I felt the urge to fold and hated that reflex. "Timer ran out," I said and held her stare. Her jaw moved once, then twice, like she wanted to bite something. She tried the power button and nothing blinked back. Her eyes cut toward the car keys by the door. "Fine, I'll work at the cafe," she muttered without looking at me. She reached for the keys and paused when I stepped between. "Fuel card is mine," I said, and she froze mid-reach. "You think you own me," she said with a bitter smile. I opened my banking app and tapped the last 4 months. Numbers stacked fast and my hands stopped shaking. I held the screen just long enough for recognition. Her smirk bent, then returned thinner and meaner. She pivoted to the fridge and grabbed nothing. "Then move out tonight," she said with forced calm. I felt the house tilt and caught the counter edge. "You want that?" I asked, keeping the room steady. She blinked slow, like resetting the piece she played next. Phone buzzed in her palm and she typed furious lines. "Group project due at noon," she said without looking up. "Then call your group," I answered and swallowed the old guilt. She tossed the phone onto the couch and it slid. "I called you a leech because it worked," she added like a dare. I opened the hall closet and pulled out a slim folder. Receipts, screenshots, and a single summary on top. I did not wave them, I placed them on the table. She glanced down and flinched like the paper burned. "Petty math," she said, but her voice dropped a step. Her hand hovered over the folder and then retreated. "Return the internet and I'll transfer later," she offered softly. "Later keeps moving," I said, and my chest cooled. She drummed her fingers once and twice and stopped. "You're serious," she said, and the air got heavier. I pocketed my spare car fob and watched her notice. Her shoulders stiffened and she reached for her backpack. "Keys then," she said, trying casual and missing it. "Insurance is under me now," I said with a nod. She laughed too loud and it cracked on the last beat. She stepped close enough that I felt her breath. "You will cave by sunset," she whispered without blinking. I remembered every cave and chose the door instead. "Bus stop is 7 minutes," I said and opened it. Wind pushed in and carried her stare back at me. She grabbed a hoodie and slid past without touching. On the porch she turned and held up a finger. "This breaks us," she said, and waited for my flinch. I let the silence stand and did not chase her. She lowered her hand and walked toward the corner without looking back. The front door clicked and I watched the time crawl. I opened my laptop and killed every shared login. One by one music storage rides, access gone with clean taps. A payment request left my screen with a hard thud. I knew she would feel that hit before she turned the corner. Her message landed first, 3 words, "Bring it back." Another followed now like a stomp I could hear. I typed a single answer, "Start paying," and locked the thread. My thumb hovered over the old favors list. I closed it because that list fed our worst cycle. Footsteps rushed the hallway, hers fast and loaded. The door swung wide and her backpack skidded across tile. "Open it," she snapped, knuckles pressed against the table. I met her stare and held still until the tremor passed. "You owe me for 4 months," I said and waited. She paced tight loops, eyes darting to the counter. "You don't get to teach me lessons," she muttered through clenched teeth. I slid the printed totals closer without touching her hands. She leaned over them and her breathing went shallow. "Fake math," she tried, but her wrist shook anyway. I unlocked the car app and removed her driver profile. Her head jerked up like an alarm tripped underfoot. "That's low," she said, shoulders squared for a shove. "Insurance is mine," I answered, voice steady as a lock. "You can take the bus or request a transfer." She fired off a call, speaker loud so I could hear. Pick me up in 10, she told someone and hung up. Contingency, she said and watched for soft spots. I didn't give one. I pulled out a manila envelope. Inside sat a small claims form with her name on it. You wouldn't, she whispered, color draining from her cheeks. This starts if the insults return, I said without blinking. She stared at the form like it might jump. Her jaw flexed and then unclenched with effort. Find truce until noon, she bargained, eyes still moving. No truce, I replied and slid the form away. Only boundaries, I added, and felt my spine lift. She scoffed and reached for the modem, nothing lit. She traced the chords like a safecracker, learning a pattern. Her mouth twitched when she realized the missing piece. Where is it? She asked, scanning pockets and drawers. Somewhere you won't find before your ride, I answered. She checked under cushions and inside the junk bowl. The clock kept chewing minutes and her shoulders climbed. If I'm late, I lose the grade, she murmured. You chose the name, I said, and watched her blink. Her eyes flickered over the receipts again and stuck. How much to restore everything today? She asked finally. Half rent up front in your phone bill, I said. She swallowed and glanced toward the door like help might enter. Her ride honked twice and she flinched hard. Keep the line open for messages, she pleaded quickly. Pay first, I answered and held out my phone. She opened her banking app and stared at the negative. I can cover a portion now, she forced out. Send it, I said, and waited for the buzz. The transfer pinged, small yet real as a step forward. I restored nothing, yet I only noted the movement. We finish the balance tonight, I said and stood. She shouldered the backpack and paused in the doorway. This won't end here, she warned with a thin smile. Then fix it here, I replied, voice graveled by resolve. She opened her mouth and then closed it without a word. Her ride honked again, longer, impatient and sharp. She left without slamming, which felt like a fragile experiment. Silence returned, not peace, just space where choices echo. I canceled autopay on the last shared utility. The confirmation screen blinked and my chest eased an inch. I tucked the small claims form under a cookbook. If I needed it later, I wanted it close. My phone lit, mom, name glowing like a warning bell. Be kind, her text reads, short yet heavy. I stared at it too long and typed nothing. Kind doesn't mean enabling, kind can mean no. I set the phone face down and listened for tires outside. Another message arrived, Riley, 2 lines and a pause. I'll bring cash after class, don't lock me out. I typed a reply, front door stays open, rules stay firm. A second ping followed, thanks, and a single period. That dot felt like the start of a different fight. I checked the hallway camera and watched our morning rewind. Her backpack slide, the glance at the dark modem. The moment she saw the envelope and lost posture. I closed the feed and breathed without counting beats. I knew she would test me again before sundown. She returned before noon and shouldered the door against my hand. 2 classmates drifted in behind her like backup already rehearsed. Hotspot now, she demanded, jaw set, eyes locked. I stood still and let the request hang between us. One friend cleared his throat like a countdown had started. I have work due, she pressed, foot tapping near my toes. Balance first, I answered, voice low so it didn't shake. The tall friend smiled at me like we were teammates. Quick fix helps everyone, he tried, palms open and harmless. I placed my phone face up and opened the ledger. Her fingers snapped out and tried to take it. I caught her wrist gently and slipped the phone away. No recording, she warned, chin lifting, pulse quick. I record when rules get bent, I said and stepped back. The second friend moved closer and blocked the hall with a shoulder. She scanned the shelf and spotted the missing piece instantly. Find it or I'll tear this place apart, she gritted. Different plan, I said and reached for the remote. The screen went dark and stayed dark without the account. Her throat worked like she'd swallowed something sharp on purpose. A knock hit the door and everyone froze in place. I opened it to a delivery driver holding a small box. Her eyes flared when she read my name on the label. Open it, she ordered, voice sliding into command again. I signed slowly and kept the package tucked under my arm. The tall friend pulled out his phone and started streaming. "Look at this controlling nonsense," he announced to nobody. I raised a hand and pointed at the camera. "You're filming in my home without consent," I said flat. He lowered it an inch, then tucked it away with a shrug. My screen lit with a message from the building manager. Noise complaint at 11:30 and a warning attached. I held the text where she could read the threat. "Keep pushing and the fine lands on us," I said. She swallowed hard and rolled her shoulders like she could shed it. "Cash then," she muttered and peeled a stack from her pocket. She threw the bills on the counter without breaking eye contact. I counted fast and announced the gap without commentary. Her mouth twitched like she wanted to argue and couldn't. "We finish it tonight," I added, and let the silence bite. She pivoted and reached for a hook by the door. Her fingers closed around a key she'd hidden behind tape. I watched her stride outside and aim for my car. The handle lifted once and the alarm answered like a siren. She flinched and stared back at me with startled rage. A neighbor leaned over the railing with wide, curious eyes. "Everything good?" he called, eyebrows up, tone casual. "All good," I answered and pressed the fob to silence. The classmates exchanged looks that said they hated being there. One coughed and drifted toward the exit with forced nonchalance. She stomped back in and knocked a frame to the floor. I looked at the broken corner and then at her hands. "Damage means deduction," I said, keeping my voice even. She splayed her fingers and blinked like the room brightened. The remaining friend took 2 steps back toward the hall. "Drive me to the bank," she blurted, breath coming fast. "Walk with me then," I replied, pointing to the street. She hesitated and checked her phone for a miracle. 15 minutes there, I added, and opened the door. She moved first and I followed a few paces behind. We reached the corner and she stopped dead at the curb. "Don't hover," she said without looking at me. "I'll wait here," I answered and leaned against the fence. She darted toward the branch with tight, quick strides. I counted to 100 and stared at nothing useful. She came back with a receipt and a sealed envelope. "Not all of it," she admitted, eyes glossy but steady. "Hand it over," I said, and felt my throat cool. The weight hit my palm and took some heat with it. "Tonight we clear the rest," I added and watched her nod. Back inside, the house felt wired and ready to spark. I updated the ledger and locked the accounts again. Her classmates whispered in the hallway like they feared echoes. "You can go," she told them without turning her head. The door clicked and left us with our breathing. "Partial restore for messages only," I offered, holding the line. She considered it, then tapped once on the counter for nerve. "Messages only," she agreed, eyes focused on my hand. I toggled a single service and watched her phone revive. Her shoulders dropped a notch and then tensed right back up. She scrolled, then looked me over like weighing a final card. "There's a group chat tearing you apart," she said, almost eager. "Mute it," I answered and set my phone face down. "You're not curious?" she asked, eyebrow raised like a hook. "Curious doesn't pay the balance," I said and kept still. Evening crept close and the room started feeling smaller. She stacked the remaining bills on the table like a challenge. "After dinner I get the rest," she promised without blinking. "After payment I restore what you earn," I replied. She held my gaze and didn't blink at all. Her phone buzzed and she turned away from me. "Ride offer for later," she murmured, thumb hovering. "Use it if you need to," I said, careful with tone. She tucked the phone into her pocket and stood straighter. I could feel the next test gathering just out of sight. The knock hit hard enough to rattle the frame. I opened to find her with a duffel and a stare. "Count it," she said and set the bag at my feet. I unzipped and saw bundled bills and 3 wrinkled notes. "Short," I said, and the hallway tightened like a noose. "Add my laptop to your tab," she shot back without blinking. She slid it from the duffel and pressed the power button. The screen asked for my account and stopped her cold. "That login is gone," I said, and she bit her lip. Her thumb hovered like she might crack it open by will. She pivoted toward the console and pulled a drawer halfway. "Give me the backup key," she murmured through clenched teeth. I rested my palm over the gap and didn't move. Keys are reassigned, I said and watched her jaw twitch. She let the drawer slam, then turned with that old fire. Her phone lit with a call on speaker for effect. Yeah, putting him on, she announced to the empty air. A man's voice filled the room like courtroom gravel. Son, restore services or we involve the property office. I looked at the phone and pressed end without comment. That was the coordinator, she lied too quickly for comfort. I pointed to the door and kept my tone level. Anyone official can knock, I said, feeling my pulse climb. She paced 3 steps and back with clipped ankles. Stop playing guard, she hissed and reached for the duffel. I lifted the bundles onto the table and started counting. She leaned over my shoulder and timed her breath to mine. Half now, she whispered, the rest after class tonight. No more later, I answered and sealed the last strap. Her hands flattened on the table like she might push. You want everything back, she asked, eyes sharp and wet. Yes, I said and felt something heavy slide off. She swallowed and nodded once like acceptance hurt. Then you take what's yours and leave what's me. No, she said. I saw the loophole forming and braced for the swing. She hustled to her room and started stacking items fast. Mine, 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 she chanted under her breath. I followed and pointed at the streaming box and headphones. Purchased on my card, I said and lifted them out. She snatched a charger and stuffed it into her hoodie. Her screen buzzed and she shot me a look. Posting receipts in the group, she warned like a blade. Post the transfers too, I replied and held up my phone. She flared, then flicked her wrist like throwing away a thought. Fine, she spat and jammed the device into her pocket. A new message flashed from the building app with urgency. Emergency maintenance at 4 and all units must be accessible. I showed her the alert and watched her recalibrate. Leave a path, I said and pointed to the hall. She forced a laugh that sounded like tires on gravel. She stalked to the kitchen and yanked open a cabinet. I'll cook at Mia's, she said, voice suddenly almost light. Good, I said and took the duffel off the counter. Her gaze tracked the bag like a hawk tracks a field. You keeping that until the rest arrives, she guessed. Collateral, I said and zipped the bag with a hard line. She stepped close enough to fog my glasses and held there. You do not lock me out tonight, she breathed slowly. Door stays open for you, I answered, not for your posse. Her eyes narrowed and then widened like a new plan clicked. The peep cam pinged with someone lingering by the mailbox. She tilted her head and waited for me to check it. I let it ring and stared at her instead. She broke first and looked back down the hall. Expecting anyone, I asked, and her throat moved once. She grabbed her backpack and slid past me with quiet speed. At the threshold, she paused and tested a final line. If I finish the total by 8, you restore service. By 8, I agreed and held out my palm. She tapped my knuckles once like sealing a rough deal. The door shut gently and I turned to the list. I transferred the car title request and queued a pickup. I switched the last utility to manual billing with alerts. Each confirmation clicked like a bolt sliding into place. I knew the quiet would not last past dusk. At 3:50, the maintenance crew knocked in neon vests. I let them through and stood aside with folded arms. They checked valves and wrote notes on a smudged clipboard. One of them paused at the hallway camera and frowned. Everything all right, he asked, eyes flicking between rooms. Fine, I answered and watched his partner test another shutoff. They left with a thumbs up and a warning about leaks. The door shut and the apartment exhaled like a boxer between rounds. I gathered the items I owned into a single corner. Not hoarding, just ready if the next swing landed hard. 5 minutes later, her friend Mia texted from an unknown number. Stop humiliating her online, the message read like a charge. I blinked at the accusation and felt heat climb my neck. No post from me, I wrote and attached simple screenshots. No insult, just totals, just transfers, just dates. My hand hovered over send and I hesitated for once. I deleted the images and typed a shorter reply. We're sorting money, that's all, I wrote instead. 3 dots pulsed and then vanished without a response. Silence can be a fuse when the room is dry. At 6:20, the knob twisted with a slow, deliberate hand. She stepped in with damp hair and a tight jaw. "I have the remainder," she announced, eyes on the bag. "Counted," I said, and opened my notebook with measured care. She placed fresh bills down like laying tiles in a floor. I tallied and nodded once because the math finally balanced. She didn't smile, and neither did I because something shifted. "You restore the student account tonight," she pressed, chin lifted. "After we write rules," I answered and set a pen down. She stared at the pen like it might bite. "Rules," she repeated, one eyebrow high and daring. "No insults, no surprises, shared costs split immediately." I placed the paper between us and waited for ink. She read each line and her shoulders lowered a hair. "Add one more," she whispered, fingers drumming a nervous beat. "If I slip, you warn me once," she said without flinching. "After that, you pull whatever lever you need." She signed under that line with quick, decisive strokes. I signed beside her and felt something unknot in my chest. The page looked thin, but it carried weight we both felt. "Restore messages and study tools," she said, voice steady. I toggled 2 services and watched her screen breathe. "Not everything, enough to keep the deal alive tonight." She tucked the phone away and kept looking at the contract. "Tomorrow we test this for real," she murmured like a vow. She reached for the duffel and paused mid-grab. "Leave it here until morning," I offered without thinking ahead. Her eyes flicked up quick like I had thrown a rope. "Fine," she agreed and stepped back from the table. We both knew a storm could still punch through the window. She walked to her room and closed the door without a slam. I stood in the hall and let my pulse settle. In the quiet, I heard the faint rhythm of typing. I restored nothing else and slid the contract into a folder. The night waited and I could feel it watching. The kitchen timer beeped and her door opened on cue. She carried a plastic container like it was proof of effort. "Eat with me," she said, chin lifted for acceptance. "Ground rules first," I answered, tapping the signed sheet. She exhaled through her nose and set down forks like chess pieces. "My study portal still blocks uploads," she started without eye contact. "One toggle at a time," I said, keeping my hands visible. She glanced at the router shelf and checked her pockets. "I'm not hunting," she muttered, shoulders tight, eyes restless. "Good," I said, because temptation always walked in with her. She slid cash across the table and let it sit. "Bus drained me," she admitted, voice low but even. "We can budget next week," I offered, watching her flinch. "Not pity," she snapped, then softened by a hair. "Then planning," I corrected, keeping the bridge narrow. Her phone vibrated twice and she froze mid-bite. "Group chat wants receipts," she said with an edge. "Share the contract," I suggested, tapping the margin line. She hovered, then took a picture with steady hands. "No comments," I warned, because commentary starts fires. A new alert flashed across my screen and she noticed. "Fraud attempt on the streaming account," I read aloud. Her eyebrows rose like she smelled a trap outside. "Not me," she said, palms open, shoulders squared. "Then change your password tonight," I answered, eyes on her. Footsteps rushed the hallway and a fist tapped the door. "Open up, it's Mia," came through the wood sharp. Riley stiffened and glanced at me for the call. "Your guest, your responsibility," I said, stepping aside. She pulled the door and braced for backlash. Mia looked me over like I owed the world. "You humiliated her," she opened, wrists tight, pupils bright. "Money got handled," I said, pointing at the signed page. Mia Reed scoffed, then turned to Riley for a signal. "Do you feel safe?" she asked, voice suddenly careful. "I'm fine," Riley answered, chewing the word like gravel. Mia shifted weight and put down a tote near her feet. "Borrow the hotspot for an hour?" she asked without blinking. "Accounts linked back to me," I said, shaking my head. "Library is open late," I added, holding the line. Mia's stare hardened and then slid off like rain. "I'm here if you need me," she told Riley, hands squeezing. She left the tote anyway and walked out without goodbye. Riley watched the door, then nudged the bag toward me. "Check it for bait," she muttered, not joking at all. I opened the tote and found a prepaid modem humming. "Plan and record," I said, imagining the fallout. Riley grimaced and dragged a finger under her eye. She thinks pressure works, she said, turning the device off. Let's not feed her audience, I added, drawing a breath. Her lock screen lit with a name I didn't recognize. Professor wants a draft by 9, she murmured, pulse jumping. Turn on document upload, nothing else, she requested fast. I weighed the ask and nodded once like a judge. A single switch flipped and her shoulders lowered an inch. She typed in bursts, then paused and swallowed hard. I don't know how to end this section, she admitted quietly. Use facts in the rubric, I said, staying out of the weeds. She nodded and typed again, more focused, less brittle. I felt the room loosen, which scared me more. At 8, she slid her phone across the table face up. All required tools active, the status read in plain text. She turned her palms upward like she was surrendering metal. You keep entertainment off, she said, testing the boundary. That stays off until next review, I agreed, keeping rhythm. Her screen pinged and she flinched like it burned. Group chat calling you a jailer, she reported without looking. Mute it if it messes with your grade, I said. She hovered over the button and pressed it with a hiss. Quiet feels weird, she whispered, eyes on the floor. The peephole alert blinked again and I checked the feed. Our father stood outside with a grocery bag and a frown. Riley stiffened so hard the chair squeaked against tile. Your invite, I said, steady but not warm. She took 3 breaths, then nodded at the handle. He stepped in and surveyed the cleared table and contract. Everyone calm, he announced like he owned the air. No shouting here, I said, because that mattered tonight. Riley stood between us like a mediator under fire. Money is square, she told him, chin lifted like armor. He reached for the paper and scanned the lines. Quickly. This is strict, he muttered, thumb pressing each clause. Strict beats chaos, I answered, keeping my voice measured. Riley watched us like a referee waiting for a foul. Can you support these terms, he asked, eyes landing on her. I already am, she replied, and I watched him blink. He set down the bag and leaned closer to the contract. Add a grace window for emergencies, he suggested flat. Riley looked at me, face unreadable and tight. 24 hours once a month, I offered, hand open. She considered, then reached for the pen with decisive motion. Abuse it and it vanishes, I added before ink. Deal, she said, and the signature landed clean. Our father grunted approval and stepped back from the table. Keep me out of your group chat wars, he added, almost smiling. He left as fast as he arrived and silence seeped back. Riley stared at the door and then at the contract again. I turned something ugly into structure today, she said quietly. Structure keeps us honest, I replied, feeling the truth settle. Her phone buzzed and the portal showed upload complete. Draft submitted, she breathed, hands finally unclenching. She looked at the entertainment section and then away fast. Leave it off tonight, she decided before I could speak. Tomorrow we revisit with clear heads and clean math. I nodded because restraint is a muscle that tires slow. She rose and gathered her notes with careful movements. Thanks for not caving, she added, eyes not leaving the page. Thanks for not escalating, I answered, meaning every word. She paused at the hallway and tapped the contract once. We try this for a week, then we see if it holds. She shoved a folded note under my door and knocked once. Open came through, voice tight, breath clipped by nerves. I turned the lock and she stepped in without looking up. I called the school, she blurted, hands restless on the table. They want my devices verified by noon or I lose the placement. Show me the steps, I said, keeping the agreement in mind. She unlocked her screen and pulled up the verification page. 2 codes, 1 email, 1 text, she said, chewing her lip. Tools only, no extras, I reminded, thumb on the controls. Fine, she answered and nodded like the words scraped. A chime hit both phones and the codes appeared in tandem. She read hers aloud and I entered mine with steady hands. The portal spun, then flashed green, then stalled on the last field. Need a scan from the campus account, she murmured, swallowing hard. Temporary access for this task, I agreed, finger over enable. Her gaze flicked to the entertainment toggle like a reflex. Not that, I said, and held her focus with a stare. She exhaled, then laughed once, very small, almost fragile. Old me would have tried anyway, she admitted without swagger. New terms mean new moves, I answered and pressed confirm. The system accepted the scan and generated a badge instantly. She stared at it like it might vanish if she blinked. Print Center opens at 10, she said, shifting on her heels. You can get there in 8 minutes if you walk, I replied. Her hand drifted toward my keys and then retreated like from a flame. I'll take the bus, she said, surprising both of us just slightly. You still owe last night's small overage, I reminded, voice even. She winced, dug into her wallet, and counted exact change. The coins chimed on the wood and settled like a verdict. I don't want you funding me anymore, she added, eyes steady. A vibration rattled the counter and the building app popped up. Management scheduled fire inspections today and needed clear hallways. She moved first and shifted her stack of school junk aside. I lifted my box gear and opened space shoulder to shoulder. We worked without talking, and the quiet arranged our choices. The peephole pinged and Mia's face filled the tiny screen. I'm here with a spare hotspot, her text followed a second later. Riley looked at me, then at the contract taped to the fridge. Don't open, she said, jaw tight, hands still. I didn't move, and the knock faded into hallway noise. Her phone buzzed again and a new message rolled in. Interview moved up to this afternoon, show proof of personal contribution. She pressed her palm to the table like bracing a wave. I can't show your transfers for this, she whispered, cheeks hot. You can show today's payments and the agreement, I answered, no wobble. She grabbed the signed sheet and held it up to the light. Feels like I'm holding a mirror, she muttered without humor. Mirrors are boring until they're accurate, I said, then regretted the edge. She didn't bite, she traced her signature with one finger. I'll bring a copy back after I print, she promised, voice firm. Before you go, I added one more step. I opened the car app and added her as a guest driver. Limited hours, gas on her account, location tracking visible. Loyal. She watched the screen like I'd handed her tools and trust. If this gets abused, it disappears, I warned, keeping it crisp. That won't happen, she said, and the certainty sounded new. She tucked the sheet into her folder and slung it over her shoulder. At the door she paused and searched my face with intent. Were you scared I'd never change? She asked, not teasing. I was scared I'd keep rescuing, I admitted, heart thudding once. She flinched like the truth clipped her ankle mid-stride. Then don't rescue, she answered, opening the door half wide. Just hold the boundary and let me mate it. I nodded because that was the whole point all along. She stepped into the hall and the latch clicked behind her. Inspection rolled through at 11 and the alarms chirped twice. I stood by while they checked vents and scribbled notes. Looks compliant, one tech said, already halfway out. The apartment felt lane and honest when they were gone. I reset nothing and waited for whatever the afternoon brought. At 1:15, my screen lit with her message and a photo. A badge hung from her lanyard and a schedule sat beside it. Placement confirmed, the text read, and then another followed. I told them I've been covering my share, she wrote, careful. I stared at that line and felt something unclench in my chest. The knob turned softly and she reappeared with 2 plastic cups. Small win, she said, offering one like a peace coin. I accepted, not for taste, just ceremony and witness. I also blocked the insult word in my chats, she added. That word dies here too, I answered, and meant every piece. She nodded, then pointed to the entertainment section with a question. End of week review, I said, letting the silence measure us. She didn't argue, she tapped the contract and smiled once. I start at 9 tomorrow, she said, eyes bright but wary. We draft a budget tonight and stick to it hard. Her phone pinged with a message from Mia, are you okay? She typed back quickly, working on my stuff, talk later. No screenshotted drama, no public theater, just a sentence. She placed the phone upside down and leaned on her elbows. We're not fixed, she said, honest and sharp as a nail. No, I agreed and pulled out a clean sheet. Fixed isn't the goal, functional is the goal. We wrote 3 lines that mattered more than anything else. Split costs immediately, ask before borrowing, no names as weapons. She underlined the last one twice and looked at me like a challenge. One more thing, she said, voice steady but careful. If I backslide, you cut access fast and we reset. I met her stare and felt the room hold still. I will, I said, because mercy without limits built the mess. She breathed out slowly, then squared her shoulders like game time. Evening crept close and she packed for the morning trial run. I returned the missing plug and kept my hands open. She didn't snatch, she placed it on the shelf like a loan. I earned the rest, she said, turning toward her room. At the doorway she paused, then looked back with something hopeful. If I keep this up for a month, we revisit the fun stuff, she ventured. A month of clean follow-through, I agreed, drawing a line in ink. She grinned, quick and nervous, then disappeared behind the door. I stood there in the quiet and felt the house settle around us. We were finally paying for our lives with actions, not names.